The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you, and enjoy. So when I met my wife, Tara, we were both keynoting at a conference. It was a pretty quick connection we had, and we quickly moved into a torrid text messaging romance. We then graduated into emails, but during the texting romance, we're just kind of getting to know each other. You know, we went for a couple of walks during that weekend, and as we were texting back and forth, she sent me this text. And this is what it said. What is the difference between your existence and that of a saint? The saint knows that the spiritual path is a sublime chess game with God. And the beloved has made such a fantastic move that the saint is now continually tripping over joy and bursting out in laughter and saying, "I surrender." Whereas, my dear, I'm afraid you still think you have 1,000 serious moves. So I got that email, I got that text, I thought, my God, that's awfully forward of her. She really called me out. Because I really do think I've got 1,000 serious moves ahead of me in my life. Later, of course, I realized that was not from her, that was actually a quote from Hafez. And I still come back to that quote, though. Let me read it again. What is the difference between your existence and that of a saint? The saint knows that the spiritual path is a sublime chess game with God, and that the beloved has made such a fantastic move that the saint is now continually tripping over joy and bursting out in laughter and saying, "I surrender." Whereas, my dear, I'm afraid you still think you have 1,000 serious moves. What I'd like to talk about tonight is a little bit on the goal of practice. Why? Why are you practicing? And the role of strong effort, which is part of this path, resilience, focus. Talked about this 2 weeks ago. But also to talk about the role of balance. How do you balance effort with surrender? And what is this role of surrender, and how do you incorporate it not only into your meditation practice, but how do you begin to invite surrender into your life? So what is the goal of meditation practice? You know, for many, many years, I practiced transcendental meditation. I learned it when I was 15, blew my mind, changed my life. I was utterly, utterly dedicated to the practice. I practiced quite fervently for about 15 years before I switched into other practices. But I was a kind of a fervent follower of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who had quite a few powerful things to say. And part of the tradition in transcendental meditation is at some point you can learn these particular techniques. They're called the Siddhi techniques. And there's a whole thing about how they work, but basically it's about really, really stilling the mind and then invoking these particular images and thoughts that can stimulate really powerful releases in the brain and ultimately can cultivate in what we would think of as supernormal powers. But they're really ultimately very, very normal when the mind is completely relaxed. The mind is free. Consciousness is free to do what it needs to do and where it needs to go. So there's very, very interesting, wild things that you can do with your mind when it gets very, very still. So at one point, the military was interested in learning these techniques. And there were people who were kind of thrown up in arms. Why? You know, this is terrible. This is going to be militarized. But Maharishi, allegedly, said this is wonderful. Let them use this technique. Because you can only access these particular aspects of mind when you are deeply surrendered into the laws of nature, into the laws of reality. So what a wonderful thing to do. So maybe your call to practice is to learn these amazing powers of concentration and the amazing things you can do with your mind as your mind gets more and more clear and more aligned with the laws of nature. Maybe you just want to feel less stressed or make better decisions or heal a broken heart or get your blood pressure down. But we all have a call to practice for different reasons. And for many, the call to practice comes from some deep dissatisfaction, a realization that my life isn't all it could be. There's got to be more to this life than what I'm experiencing right now. That's a profound call, that realization that there's got to be more. Sometimes I talk with people and they say, you know what? I always told myself when I was making this much, then I'd be happy. Well, I'm making this much and I'm not happy. There's got to be more to what life is all about. And this was really the call that the Buddha experienced. Led a very, very protective life and encountered what are referred to as the four heavenly messengers. He saw for the first time someone grievously sick. He saw someone who was old, teeth falling out, hair falling out. He saw a corpse for the first time. And he asked his escort, does this happen to everyone? And his escort said, yeah, everyone gets sick, everyone gets old, everyone dies. And then he saw this fourth element, which was a sannyasi, a renunciate, who had nothing but the clothes he was wearing and a begging bowl, who had a quality of freedom about him. And he had a conversation with this guy, and he thought, this is my calling. What is it that is beyond sickness, old age, and death? A burning desire to know what that is. And so we're called to certain things in our lives. There are certain things you know are good for you, or certain things that you know you want, and then you give yourself to it. And it's important to honor that. And for whatever reason you're called to meditation, it's very important to honor that and remember that. I know that my life goes better when I take time to meditate every day. It's been proven. And so remembering that, when I don't want to meditate, and I remember, you know what? Life always goes better when I do this. Or as James Baraz, the great meditation teacher from Spirit Rock, says, I've never sat for meditation ever in my life. And after my meditation thought, I really shouldn't have done that. So when you feel the call, chances are you respond in the classic way, which is through action, through taking action. And that's what the Buddha did. This is the role of strong effort. He wanted to wake up more than anything. So what he did, he studied with the teachers of that day. A lot of his disciplines were in the form of yoga, which was a very, very different form of yoga than now. Lycra and spandex had not been invented. And a lot of the practices of that time dealt with asceticism, denying the body, pushing edges, exploring intensity, and then moving into extreme asceticism. And this was this form of doing. It was a form of purification, a form of burning off all the defilements, burning off everything that can be burned off. There's this great prayer that I believe comes from yoga that I share from time to time. It says, Lord, burn what can be burned, drown what can be drowned, and cut what can be cut. For I want to know what it is that cannot be burned, cannot be drowned, and cannot be cut. That's a brutal prayer. But when we engage into the practice, this is really what we're signing up for. So in this extreme asceticism, he took on fasting. And there are different allegories in different traditions on how he fasted. But, one is that he ate 1 grain of rice less every day until there was nothing. And there was another that says he had 1 sesame seed, 1 grain of rice, and 1 drop of water every day. But the whole metaphor here is that extreme denial of the senses. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of the result of that in a moment. But have you ever had that desire for something that you know you wanted, and you knew you'd do anything to get it? It's a really, really powerful calling. When you have that calling to do something, sometimes it comes out of fear. Sometimes it comes out of a fear of failure, a fear of shame, a fear of loss. Sometimes it comes out of a desire to win, a desire to be the best, a desire to be famous, a desire for pleasure. Sometimes it comes out of creativity. You want to do it because you can't explain why. This is something you just got to do. It's that place of choiceless choice. Yeah, I've got options, but not really. Something's telling me I got to do this. So we become doers. And one of my favorite books in the past is the book Getting Things Done by David Allen. Because I love to get things done. And I still use his system. My whole organization draws on the principles of getting things done, where basically you've got all of your projects, every single project you can imagine is written down. And the whole idea is, as David Allen says, you want your mind to be like water, so it only has so much RAM. So write everything down, have everything in a system, and then you review it. So it's a really, really helpful system, and it has helped me get a lot of things done in my life. Getting things done is addictive. Getting things done is a way of soothing our anxiety. One more thing marked off that list. And I noticed from a pretty early age that I got attention when I got things done. So I became a getting things done kind of person. But I also noticed after 3-4 decades that my list of my to-dos was consistently beyond what was reasonable. And that began to point out a certain insanity that I was constantly reaching, constantly reinforcing the sense of there's more than I can possibly get to. On the one hand, having something to do kind of soothed my anxiety, and getting it done soothed my anxiety. But on the other hand, there's this never-ending to-do list that just kept stretching and stretching. And I realized at one point, I'm climbing a ladder here, and I'm climbing pretty fast, but wait a minute, is the ladder on the right wall? And this becomes an interesting point. It certainly was an interesting point in my life when I realized that I was doing, as one of my teachers said, you can watch someone row a boat going in a tight circle, and you can marvel at how fast they're going. But then you realize they're just going in a little circle. They're not getting anywhere. And then this brings up a very, very powerful and a very deep question, which is, what do you want? What are you doing now that is going to be taking with where you want to be down the road? It's very easy to get caught in the doing and forget the end result. And one of the best stories that I know of is about Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi was one of the great sages of India, and he taught inquiry meditation, where he taught basically there are 2 questions, and if you can live into these questions sincerely and deeply and keep peeling the onion, that they will reveal your true nature. The first question, who are you, or what are you? The second question, what do you really, really want? Incredibly powerful practice. And he was one of these teachers who was just simply abide in presence. And someone came, and he would meet with visitors, and someone came, and they were really they were a fitness freak. And he was going on and on about, well, these are the purifying foods I eat. Here are the rituals I do to be really, really healthy. Here are the exercise regimes I do. And here's this healthy, glowing body I would really like you to see. And Ramana Maharshi very, very kindly just smiled and said, that's wonderful. You will have the most beautiful corpse in the graveyard. Remembering the end point. Everything changes. Everything that's born out of causes and conditions is subject to fall away, which includes this body, our point of view, our emotions, all of that are destined to go at some point. And having that knowledge can deeply inform our practice. And it certainly did for me when I began to explore how much of a chronic doer I was, and was there another way? And really what it points toward is this very, very profound and exquisite teaching that came directly out of the Buddha's own experience. This teaching of the middle way, a balance, of not too tight, not too loose. I'd mentioned in a recent talk the importance of balance, and with this example of how if you're training for the Olympics and you want to be the very, very best in the world, then what you'll need to do is really hone in on this skillful balance of effort and recovery. And what happens is if you err on the side of too much effort, you will overtrain. And then your muscles aren't going to be as relaxed and available when you need to perform. If you err too much on the side of recovery, well, your muscles aren't going to be as strengthened as they can be. The synapses aren't going to be as finely tuned as they can be for whatever sport that you are training for. So balancing effort and recovery is critical when you are developing your body. And it's the same thing in spiritual practice. It's the same thing in life. And here's how it arose for the Buddha, in my understanding, which possibly deeply flawed and filled with all kinds of hallucinations. As the story goes, the Buddha was in the midst of his extreme asceticism, denying the body food, denying the body water, and in trying to subdue these passions, these human passions, trying to eradicate this sense of self. And in the midst of being so weak, and as the story goes, he was so weak he couldn't sit up anymore. It occurred to him that maybe he was at the end of this exploration. And he thought, well, might there be another way rather than this extreme asceticism? And he had a memory. And the memory was of a spring ceremony. His father, who was one of the main authorities in his culture, was kind of overseeing this ceremony. As a young boy, he was sitting under a rose apple tree, and just the sense of the fragrances and feeling safe and feeling just sort of the magical moment that was happening. A certain kind of joy was in that memory, and he remembered that. It's something called like jouissance, the joy that arises from relaxed contemplation. And he thought, could I use a pleasant memory as a vehicle for awakening? And with that, there was some fear. And he quickly saw that the fear was the fear of getting attached to the pleasant. But then he thought, could I hold that pleasurable memory without attachment? And then this became a very powerful vehicle for awakening. And with it arose this teaching, which he taught for the rest of his life, the rest of his incarnation, this teaching of the middle way, a way of reclaiming happiness, of noticing that when unpleasant arises, there is, of course, a natural movement away. When pleasure arises, there's a natural movement toward. But is it possible to embrace both rather than to use effort and doing to kind of burn off? And you know that feeling, I'm going to whip myself in shape. The derision we hold toward ourselves tends to set up the polarity of craving and wanting and addiction. Is it possible to find that place in between where you are at the center point? And that becomes a really interesting practice. So let's take a few minutes if you'd like to try this on. Short little reflection here. If you're comfortable, you can close your eyes. And if you would, take 3 slow, deep breaths. And as you breathe, focus all of your attention on this feeling of the breath on the inside. How intimately can you feel it right now? And take a moment to sense what it's like to feel the flow of your experience. And if you would, bring into mind just a pleasant memory. And it may take a little while for a pleasant memory to kind of pop in, but something you have experienced recently or in your past that has a quality of joy to it. And as you get a sense of this memory, sense of you can pull it a little closer. Can you create a visual memory? Are there sounds or words that you associate with this? And now, can you begin to tune into the feeling inside that forms around this memory? And is it possible to hold this memory, to see it, to hold it closely, and at the same time, to observe it without attachment, without any sense of clinging, but to deeply, deeply let it be? And can you sense here the possibility of what it means to be without attachment, to allow the pleasant to arise, allow the unpleasant to arise, and to be this sense of moment-to-moment awareness, unhindered by greed or hatred? Then if you like, you can begin to deepen your breath. And you can, in your own time, you can open your eyes. And what I find so interesting in this practice of meditation is there are so many skillful means. There are so many ways to meditate. Some are very action-oriented. They're very doing-oriented. Focus on the breath. Stay with the breath. It'll take you a long, long way. So in these different ways of practicing, you can use concentration, narrow your attention like a laser. You can widen your awareness, open up to the sense of flow, sense what's changing, see the stream of your experience, be the open monitor. You can sense what it's like to invoke a sense of kindness and compassion, to kind of flood your experience with joy and kindness and compassion. You can take time to sort of pause and deeply investigate something that's arising. This practice of RAIN, of recognize, allow, investigate, and then nourish what you find, which is very, very helpful when in your practice you're experiencing physical pain or emotional turbulence or mental agitation. Another option is to let it be, to surrender into it. How do you know what to do in the practice? This is why I always feel like this practice is really a practice of self-awareness and in self-diagnosis. This first question, what am I experiencing right now? Pause, give it a name. name it. And then to ask, can I be with it? Or how can I be with it? And what this question sets you up for is your path. Not someone else's path, but your path. There's a classic teaching story of a student. This was in a meditation hall where different people they'd come up to the teacher, and the teacher would be giving instructions as everyone else was sitting. Individual instructions. And this one student came up to the teacher and says, I just want you to know, I quit. The teacher smiled and said, well, okay. Can you tell me a little bit around why you're quitting? And the student says, because honestly, you're erratic and you're inconsistent. There are times when someone will come up and you'll tell them they need to sit up straighter and they should do some extra meditation. Then the next person comes up and you tell them they should take more tea breaks and take some time to relax or go for a walk. You have no consistency whatsoever, so I'm out of here. And the teacher said, well, let me say a little bit about where the consistency is. He said the consistency is the middle way, of not too tight and not too loose. And for some people, what they really need to do is sit up a little straighter. And for others, what they need to do is to soften the grip. And I find that so, so helpful because I'm getting signals all the time, and I know you are too. And you'll get that signal of something inside tells you you're a little wound up. It wouldn't hurt to take a break, go for a walk. And then there are other times of like, you know what? You could sit a little straighter. You could bring a little bit more effort into it. And this becomes a very, very powerful, very dynamic part of the practice. This practice of self-awareness and self-diagnosis. It's the awakening of what we would call back in the ashram days, the awakening of the inner guru. The awakening of the inner one who knows. Because you know. There's something in you that knows. Whenever someone says, I really, really want to get in shape, and I'm really kind of sick of being out of shape and how I'm eating, when I ask them, is there any kind of diet that you think would really work or any kind of exercise regime that would be really, really helpful? And said, I know what I need to do. I just have to do it. And we kind of know that. And so the question becomes, how much should you be efforting and doing in your life? And how much should you just be letting things happen by themselves? For each of us, it's going to be a different response. But sometimes it's really, really juicy to turn your attention toward what does it mean to let things be. We have this real dichotomy from meditate like your hair is on fire in one tradition, and then a reading I'll share with you in a moment, which is really saying stop doing, that's the problem. The wonderful line, I think it's from Basho, who said, spring comes and the grass grows by itself. How true. How much of life is happening by itself with no effort on your part whatsoever? I have this experience where most mornings, it's been maybe almost 3 weeks because the river's been so flooded, but I'd like to paddle every morning on the Potomac River. And I paddle upriver against the current and effort, doing. And then there's this sort of magic moment where I just stop and I let the current take me back. And one of my little practices, it just sort of arose spontaneously as I'm sort of watching life happen on the river, and there's a lot happening. And so I would just ask myself, well, what would this moment be like if I wasn't here? And so I would sort of like remove myself from the equation, but just watch. And well, guess what? The birds kept flying, and the fox kept running along the edge of the river, and the fish would keep jumping, and life happens. It's in a flow state. And it's something very powerful about removing yourself as the doer and opening into the aliveness that happens by itself. One of my favorite readings here. And this is relatively long, and I'd like to invite you, if you like, to close your eyes and just sense if you can either feel this or just notice the words that might resonate for you. This is from a Tibetan teacher. And you might take 3 slow, deep breaths. And just take in this point of view, this articulation around letting be. Happiness cannot be found through great effort and willpower, but is already present in open relaxation and letting go. Do not strain yourself. There's nothing to do or undo. Whatever momentarily arises in the body-mind has no real importance at all, has little reality whatsoever. Why identify with it and become attached to it and pass judgment on it and on yourself? Far better to simply let the entire game happen on its own, springing up and falling back like waves, without changing or manipulating anything. And notice how everything vanishes and reappears magically again and again, time without end. Only your searching for happiness prevents you from seeing it. It's like a vivid rainbow which you pursue without ever catching, or a dog chasing its own tail. Although peace and happiness do not exist as an actual thing or place, it's always available and accompanies you every instant. Do not believe the reality of good and bad experiences. They're like today's weather, like rainbows in the sky. Wanting to grasp the ungraspable, you exhaust yourself in vain. And as soon as you open and relax this tight fist of grasping, infinite space is there. Open, inviting, and comfortable. Make use of this spaciousness, this freedom and natural ease. Don't search any further. Do not go into the tangled jungle looking for the great awakened elephant who's already resting quietly at home in front of your own hearth. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to undo. There's nothing to force, nothing to want, and nothing missing. It's marvelous. Everything happens by itself. And you might deepen the breath. If you like, you can open your eyes or you can remain with them closed. What a powerful perspective. Everything happens by itself. The source of your suffering is the grasping. It's the very, very search that has you forgetting that what you want is already here. All you seek is found within. How do we remember this? That's the question. Sometimes I have found it really, really helpful to take that pause, just to slow down, to shift from doing into being. The acronym, which I've shared in the past, the acronym WAIT, W-A-I-T. Really helpful to remember this from time to time. Why am I talking? And when I remember this, which is not as often as I would like, and I'm in the middle of some conversation, Just to remember, like, why am I talking? What's the impulse here? What is the doing here? What if I let that go? What if I just rested in presence? There's something so powerful about the pause. Sometimes when people ask me for advice in their meditation practice, it's very, very clear to me that they're depleted, they're exhausted. And that effort is going to do nothing but continue the process of doing and burnout. And I'll offer this suggestion, which I did once. It was really such a powerful practice. The practice is to set a specific period of time, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever. And in those 20 minutes, do what feels right. Just do what feels right. When I did this at a time of real exhaustion and depletion for myself, set an alarm. I'd say for the first 30 days, I'd lie down and fall asleep. But as I kept at this as a discipline, just in the surrender to feeling and energy, I began to feel a little more aliveness. So I could lie down and sort of scan my body. I didn't fall asleep. I was awake, lying down in my body, and I could begin to feel sensations, aliveness. And then I would just want to sit up. And then sometimes I would do movement. Sometimes I would do a little yoga. Sometimes I would sit. But there was something about that surrender to presence that was so, so powerful. If you find yourself really, really exhausted or depleted, it's a fascinating practice. Like, set that alarm. The practice is just surrender to presence. There's so much more juicy stuff around this practice of surrender. But just in the final minutes, when you're exploring this balance of the doing and the surrendering practice, just as there is a shadow side to doing, kind of the chronic craving, wanting, getting caught in the desire and the attachment to the outcome, and the freedom that comes when you can let go of the fruit of your action and let your action be pure, there's a shadow side to surrender as well. Sometimes it's called premature surrender or spiritual bypassing, where you say you're letting go of something, but you're not really letting go of something. It's a real temptation sometimes to kind of bypass the intensity. Sometimes surrender can look a little bit like indifference. It's not indifference. Sometimes in practice of surrender, you fail to confront your demons. You fail to confront the real challenges that are there. The strong, undigested emotions that are calling for attention and are calling for compassion. That you may not feel, or you may miss that spontaneous desire of what truly, truly calls you. Your path, your dharma, which actually oftentimes involves doing and sacrifice. So it's a tricky business, this middle way. And one of the more powerful things you can do is just to sense, how does this want me to be with it? Surrendering is a powerful path unto itself. There's so much more I could say about this, about not touching life, about responding to life and trusting that as you open to the flow of your life, that there'll be this inner guidance that will help you to know when it's time to effort and move forward, when it's time to soften and let be. But let's close with a short meditation, which I think helps to kind of bring this a little more clear. If you like, you can close your eyes, and you might take 3 slow, deep breaths. And for this little practice here, you might take a few moments to open your awareness to sound. Can you open your attention 360 degrees and identify all the sounds around you right now? You may notice there's a function of mind that seeks to identify the location, the name, and then also ascertaining whether it's a threat or not. It's an immediate self-protective measure. You may also notice that when you do sound meditation, you cannot do it better by trying harder. It requires this deep shift into receptivity. And can you sense what it's like to let go of the label of all the sounds and move into the experience of the sounds, to experience the sounds as just pure vibration? You may notice a few things. The sounds are changing. The sounds are beyond your control. Is it possible to relax and soften, and with the sounds as your anchor, truly surrender and let them be for the next minute? And now, as you sense the sounds, opening to this next inquiry, is it possible to feel or imagine the silence behind the sounds? And gently now, in your own time, you might begin to deepen the breath. If you like, you can let your eyes open. I think it all comes down to this. There are times in your life, there are seasons in your life, seasons in your day, where you are called into skillful doing, into action, bringing all of your attention to focus and creation. And in that skillful way of action, of releasing the fruit of your action, releasing the outcome so you can be clearly present and awake in your doing. And then there are times in your life, seasons in your life, in your day, moments in your day that call for skillful being, for simply letting things be as they are, surrendering into the moment. And just as in the Serenity Prayer, what we're really calling on is wisdom to know the difference. And I find it so helpful to really remember those questions. What is happening right now? What is my experience right now? And how does this moment want me to be with it? Is it calling for action? Or can I let it be? Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I so wish you well in your practice. May you and your doing and being and in the doobie-doobie-doo of life enjoy whatever's next. Thank you again and many blessings.